All right, so now we come to a different part of this lecture where we're going to talk not about online dating, but we're going to talk about virtual worlds. And the virtual world that has been studied the very most is one called Second Life. It's not very popular now. Other virtual worlds that have been studied quite a bit include World of Warcraft. That probably comes close second. But there's many, many virtual worlds these days. And so let's talk about what a virtual world is. And this is the website to get on Second Life if you want. So let's talk about virtual worlds and what they are. This book here is called Coming of Age in Second Life. And early research on Second Life took an anthropological approach to studying it because virtual communities really are communities with their own culture and even subcultures on that virtual world. And this book here you see, Coming of Age in Second Life, it's actually pays homage to a famous book called Coming of Age in Samoa. It was a book where, what's the name of the anthropologist? Margaret Mead went and studied in Samoa, and she just immersed herself in their culture. And that's how anthropologists do their research. It's not like psychology research, but this guy in this book, he got an avatar and he immersed himself and he made friends and then wrote about the experience for a year. The article that you read for today was actually an anthropological study, which can be useful with a topic that you don't know very much about, so quantitative research is difficult to do. Now, to talk about virtual worlds, I'm going to get out for a second of the world of psychology or anthropology or sociology and go borrow some concepts from philosophy. Now, it's a bit out of the rubric of this class, but I still want to, by way of context, explain that much of the research on virtual reality, if you get into it, it's just absolutely fascinating, and it has to do with there's a philosophy behind it about what is the nature of reality itself. Most people who study virtual reality regard it as another reality. We don't say it's less real than, quote, real life. It's just, the feelings it evokes are the same as, quote, real life. And so we see it as another kind of reality. Now, Plato had this thing he called the allegory of the cave, where he set up this thing where he said, what if you have some prisoners and they're tied up on a wall inside a cave and all they can see, their reality, is just the shadows that are cast on the wall. And what Plato said was, to those prisoners, their reality would feel just as real to them as what was actually casting the shadows, or the people that were casting the shadows. So he was the first one that very explicitly wrote about the nature of reality, and that's what we come up against when we talk about virtual reality. You see a lot of representations of virtual reality in pop culture. This comes from a movie from my college times, or I think college time, called The Matrix, where people are sort of plugged into a virtual reality where the action of the film happens as their host bodies are being hooked up to the computers, which you see here with Keanu Reeves. So, what is a virtual world? It can also be called a virtual immersive environment. It's the same thing. And for our purposes, we will define it as a computer-based environment that can simulate physical presence. You feel like you're there in places in the real world as well as imaginary worlds. So in a virtual world, you can create a virtual Danish Institute for Study Abroad. In Minecraft, some Danish people created an entire Denmark with all the buildings represented in it that ironically and sadly some Americans went and griefed or destroyed. So you can simulate a real environment, or you can make something completely different. You can make Harry Potter's castle, or whatever it's called, the school that he went to. You can create, what's it called where the hobbits live? The Shire. Oops. And some examples of virtual worlds include World of Warcraft is a pretty famous one that's a game. You guys probably played on some, my son had Webkinz, so it's where you have the stuffed animal and you chat with other players, but on that game, it's a very safe chat. You have a drop down menu for your chat, so kids can't say, hey, want to get on Skype? And then Second Life is one of the most advanced, and the thing that's interesting about that is that it's the only one that's completely created by its users. It's a bit hard to explain and a bit outside the scope of this class, but it's like the creators of Second Life, they just made some tools, they just made some building blocks. Oops, sorry about that. And then they gave the tools to the users, and the users created all sorts of places and things that could be sold, and they created clubs and forests, and so it was like our world now, it was entirely built by its users. Another one I've heard of is Sherwood Dungeon, and then a lot of you guys were on Club Penguin at some time or another, so that's also an example of a kiddie one. Virtual worlds can be used for, here's some examples. They can be used for social interaction, so you can make friends, you can have group meetings. You can, of course, game in them, though not everybody does game in them. And in fact, one thing unique about Second Life is people literally go there just to have another life. And they just exist there. They don't necessarily try to win a game or play a game at all. There are games within Second Life, but it's not the point of Second Life to play a game. Now, that contrasts that with World of Warcraft, that is a game. Virtual worlds can also be used for therapy. I saw some clients in Second Life. I had a virtual office, and I ended up writing a paper about a guy that I saw in Second Life. They can be used for sex. So, once a media is created, with very shortly, people will find a way to use it for sex. It does exist in virtual reality a lot. And there's a lot of marketplace about sex. I'll show you an example of sexuality in a second. You can also use virtual worlds for education. I taught a psychology class in Second Life for a time. I had a piece of property that was made to look like southern Utah, and a pavilion, and people would come and take these classes. And so you can teach classes in there. I used to teach a class here at the Institute for Study Abroad, where I took my class into Second Life. They all created an avatar, and we went and did a tour of a facility. So you can use it for education too, among many other things. Here's some pictures. This is a Second Life support group. This entire place, and there's this woman in the back here. I'm trying to point her out for you. Her Second Life name is Gentle Heron, but her First Life name is Alice. I forget her real life last name. But in real life, she has cerebral palsy. She has MS. And there's a huge disabled population online in general, but there's a huge disabled population in Second Life. And a lot of these folks, if you have problems with mobility and you can't easily get up and get out of the house because you're in a wheelchair, Second Life is for you, because you have a perceived mobility. Gentle Heron always talks about how she's in a wheelchair in real life and she can fly in Second Life. But they have tons of services for disabled people. They have support groups. This is people at a support group sitting around. And they have entire islands where people can get free virtual housing and dances and things like that. Here is a blues club. There's actually somebody on a stage playing blues. What they're actually doing in, quote, real life is they're sitting at home, probably in their living room, with their guitar and a microphone, and they're singing, and they're live streaming into this virtual space that's a club. And so people are listening. Some people are in the front dancing. You can animate your avatar however you want, and it will feel, I think a lot of people report that it feels as though you're there doing that thing. Here's two people chilling in a virtual home. And here is a representation of sex. All kinds of sexual things happen. BDSM happens. I was And in this case, you have a stripper pole dancer, and she chats to the audience as she slowly removes her clothes. Okay, so sexual behavior in Second Life. What I'm going to do is there's a video we would have watched had we been in class, and it's an advertisement for what's called a HUD, something you attach to your avatar to animate it in certain sexual ways. And just watch 5 minutes of the video toward the end, and you can see how realistic it will look. And if you're actually operating that, people report that it's very arousing to make your avatar do something sexy to the other person's avatar and to have a sense of control over it. It feels like you're actually there, is what they say. But take a look at that. Also take a look at, I'm going to post below a Second Life video of a birth taking place underwater. So you'll see that, which relates more closely to the reading for today. Okay. So, sex in virtual worlds. There has hardly been any research on this. And interestingly, 2 pieces of research were done by the same person, Gilbert, in 2011 and 2012. They found that virtual relationships, people reported greater satisfaction with them than they did with their real-life relationships. Now, that sounds preposterous and crazy, but FYI, one thing that's unique about the study and one problem with an over-interpreting is that the people who were having relationships in Second Life typically had a first life relationship that was much longer and more boring. So they were maybe real life married to somebody, and then they had a new boyfriend for a year in Second Life. And so that relationship was more exciting still. So that could be why they got these results. They could only ask people to compare them to their current relationships. So they found both that virtual relationships were more satisfying and virtual sex was more satisfying. People reported that virtually they tried more interesting sexual things. So as they're typing in text and making their avatars do things, they're doing things they wouldn't actually do in real life that they find erotic and exciting. So kind of interesting. People use Second Life to recover from past abuses, to act out unusual sexual interests such as BDSM, or to come out of the closet. That's a pretty common thing you see in Second Life as well. Let me further explain about these things. There are a bunch of people in Second Life with child avatars going around role-playing somebody else's kid. There's no research on this. This is my anecdotal evidence. There's no numbers here. But a large percentage of these child avatars were sexually abused when they were young. There's a fascinating film about it. If you're interested, I can show you. So there are people sort of trying to recover in sort of interesting ways from past abuse. Sometimes when people have unusual sexual interests like BDSM and they're afraid to try it in real life, they decide, I'm going to act it out online and see how it feels and see if it's me before I try it out in real life. Or maybe they never transfer to real life. But it's a way to try something out and it not be completely real and have all the risks yet. And also, one thing you see a lot of people doing in Second Life, and I'm treating a trans person right now who does not identify as trans in, quote, the real world, but is playing around with it in the virtual world. And she has come out of the closet in Second Life, but not in First Life. So and I see gay people do that as well. This is the first people I tell were online. So I'm going to stop here and switch videos because I'm about to run out of time.